Everybody, I'm Ellen Prokop, and I just want to thank our speakers for these stimulating talks, and to you, the audience, for joining us and for your thought-provoking questions and comments. So we do have some time for Q&A, and let's start with some questions for Dr. Riskin. Does your research ever intersect with museums, natural history or otherwise? And if so, what have you found in the museological space in relation to your research?
Oh, yes. Okay. Thanks for that question. I'm very much interested in museum exhibits. Especially, my recent research is on the history of evolutionary theory. And I also teach a couple of different classes. I'm currently teaching a freshman seminar on the history of theories of human evolution. And in normal times, we go to the California Academy of Sciences and we look at the exhibit on human evolution there. And I'm very much interested in how that subject is people choose to present it in exhibits. In particular, it seems to me the really important thing, for me, what makes a difference between a really successful exhibit of this subject matter and a less successful exhibit is the really successful ones, and I think the California Academy does this, represents the science as fundamentally interpretive and moving, changing all the time, so that rather than presenting the science as kind of settled and fixed and frozen and finished, the curators, I think, have really done a good job there, showing the ways in which it's a moving interpretive matter and constantly changing, and there are always open questions, and presenting the reasons why they believe the things currently that they believe as interpretive choices. So I've been very much interested in that aspect in particular of museum exhibits. Thank you. So I hope everyone can hear me. Mm-hmm. Okay. So shall I pause there? Are there more questions for me, or?
There are more questions for you. The next one is how does the Met exhibition on timepieces relate to your thesis?
The Met exhibition on timepieces. Okay, so there was, is that from a few years ago, 2016, I think there was an exhibit on timepieces, and then more recently there was the Marvels exhibit, which I thought was also absolutely wonderful. I love these exhibits, and once again, I guess, but I don't really know that I don't have any kind of professional curatorial, not being in that field, I don't have that sort of response to them. But what I really appreciate is the way in which both of those two, I think I didn't get to go to them in person, I should say, unfortunately. This is a disadvantage of living in California, and also especially now. I would have loved to go to the Marvels one just recently. But what I can tell about them is that they do a very beautiful job of representing what I was describing as an integral approach to the world, which involves science and technology and philosophy and art and performance, theater, and all of these things. It seems to me that these exhibits have been particularly successful in representing that integral combination of endeavors, all in the same sort of encapsulated in the same pieces. So I really appreciate that.
Great. Well, I hope we have time for one more.
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
Professor Riskin, can you please address in more detail the contributions of Japanese and Middle Eastern philosophers and pre-scientists to these century-long discussions and experiments? Were there any significant examples of cross-pollination, such as mathematics?
Yeah, that's another really great question. So I myself have not worked very much on, so I did mention Al-Jazari, this philosopher and engineer of the Islamic Golden Age, who's a really important figure. So I have sort of very limited, have engaged in a limited way with that history. I don't know very much about the Japanese tradition at all, although I do have books about each of those. I'm just looking on my shelf. There's a 2016 book called Allah's Automata, which is by Muhammad Abatui, which is about the sort of Islamic Renaissance and automata and machines during that period. And I have also a book on Karakuri Zui, the Japanese automata of the Edo period, which is sort of roughly 17th century to mid-19th century, by Murakami Kazuo, which is a 2012 book. So there are wonderful books about those topics. I myself have not done very much work on them.
For those of us older art historians, professors who have marvelous collections of thousands of slides, some in private collections and probably the only images of certain works. What are we to do other than think of digitizing them? Universities and museums have been destroying their slides. Isn't that correct? What about other possibilities?
I wonder if that question was intended for me. It seems like a really good and important question, but I'm not sure I have, not being an art historian and not having those kinds of collections, I don't really know much about digitizing slides and stuff like that. But it sounds like a really urgent question. I hope somebody can answer it because it does sound like a really urgent question.
Professor Riskin, a wonderful, rich, and wide-ranging talk. So many questions come to mind, but my question stems from your dark, but perhaps also hopeful vision for the future. I absolutely agree with your stress on the interrelationship of the humanities and sciences as alternate forms of knowledge and structure human experience. I think of the work done on epistemic images that make meaning, not just represent it, and your example very diplomatically balance philosophers and scientists' contributions to the discussion. I noticed that earlier ones were philosophers and later ones scientists. It would be very helpful for this audience to hear your thoughts on expanding that last tantalizing comment. How do you see the split between the humanities and the sciences being bridged by both sides, and particularly the role of art in doing that? In other words, how can philosophers after the early 19th century move this discussion forward?
Wow, that's a huge question. I guess, right, you can tell the mood that I was in when I was writing the end of the talk. It really does seem to me, I guess I am with Matthew Arnold on this, that we need the humanities, the arts, the sciences all pulling together, working together in order to come up with a kind of integral reflective understanding of subjects like pandemics, climate change, political crisis, and that, in a sense, we've been thinking a lot recently about the general fragmentation of our society, and I think intellectual fragmentation is an important part of it. It's not the most obvious part in the news, but it is, I think, a kind of cause, in a sense, if people are thinking in these very isolated ways about these problems, and in particular, if scientists, so maybe this addresses the question about what philosophers and others, humanists, can do. I think if scientists are thinking in very compartmentalized ways and also not fully taking into account the interpretive nature and interpretive history of their own disciplines, that is a problem. And so my hope is that by sort of combining a historical and artistic and philosophically interpretive and scientific approach to problems like COVID-19, climate change, political crisis, that we can arrive at better solutions. But I guess that's, it's a sort of big, vague, ambitious hope. So thank you for that.
I think this was part of the other question. It's the same person. It says that they were thinking about work by 20th century German philosophers who have tried to dissolve this barrier in different ways, like Ernst Cassirer, Hans Blumenberg, and Karl Hübner.
Yeah, interesting. And as I mentioned at the end of my talk, I think that it hasn't been across the board. This divorce has not been absolute and across the board in the very moment when it was taking place. So the connection with German philosophy I guess, partly German early 20th century physics, Heisenberg and Bohr were putting together a kind of really deeply philosophical approach to a particular set of physical questions and problems. And I think that, also, well, actually, early 20th century physics is an area in which I think many people were drawing on a real combination of philosophy, mathematics, physics, and coming up with kind of whole solutions to problems. So I think there's hope.
Great, thank you. The next question is for Allison. Just want to ask, images as evidence is becoming less reliable as we move to the digital capture of images. How do you see the concept of evidence changing as our experience with nostalgia and the fallibility of human memories combined with the image as proxy?
Thanks for that question. It's an amazing question. I suppose I think the question about the slides might have been for me since I brought it up, so I can sort of engage with that a little bit. I mean, that is the technological trick, right? Those slides were very important to us, and now they're not. And I guess the point I'd like to emphasize that I probably didn't have time for in the talk was that one of the affordances of digital technologies is that it takes part in this networked infrastructure, and slides, 35 millimeter slides, simply don't do that. So they're not in this conversation as it happens within the networked infrastructure. Only digital images can really fully participate in this. So insofar as slides can't do that, it can't participate in contemporary digital art history this way. But that isn't to say that they're old-fashioned or dumb or should be discarded. The problem is they're in another conversation now. And as I saw someone mention in the chat, although not all the audience might have been able to see it, you know, some unique collections are being kept, but then when are they shown? When are they used? And the physical space is often needed for other things now. And so it's that those are the affordances of 35 millimeter slides. You are watching them move in and out of our necessary space, and they no longer serve the purpose they used to. And in fact, to some, are albatrosses around necks. I myself am in charge of a slide collection, so it's very difficult. They're not recyclable. They just get tossed out in a big pile when they need to go. It's quite painful considering their emotional and, in fact, now nostalgic value. So I can move to the question about nostalgia. So images of objects were never actually evidence of that object. Photographs can be manipulated, have been manipulated, are always manipulated, are not actually any form of direct reproduction of the world, of course. This is something we all know, certainly as art historians. So I guess I would say, to a certain extent, I don't think images as evidence is any more or less reliable as it used to be now. I think what is important is to really reconsider, or at least always keep mindful, the way that images that we use as representations of other objects show us what we want to see, only have certain components of what it is that we need to know, and because of that, often confine what it is that we can say about the objects. We're in collaboration with these technologies. We have always been in collaboration with these technologies as we produce our field. So human memory is fallible, and that is a feature and a bug to some. It depends on what it is you're trying to argue. I don't think images as evidence changes fundamentally with digital images, frankly.
Okay, and we have another question for you, Allison. How should we read or understand images we are producing in this century, i.e. GIFs, memes, etc., in the frame you have developed, objects evidenced, not text, numbers? Is it all of those, a combination? Are you going to need another perspective apart from proxies?
It is all of those, and they proxies sits the way David and I argue it in that paper. Proxies sits as a method, not as an essential attribute of these images. So we can use anything as a proxy for any other thing. Metaphors and similes are a form of proxy making. You know, you compare something, or metonymy. You compare, you call the White House, and that means something else. You're using the White House as a proxy for something. It's a human way of argument. It's a rhetorical argument in that way. So I'm not anticipating needing another argument than proxies, but the first question is relatively easy to answer. I guess I get to say this. Yes, they are all those things as well. GIFs, memes, the way they operate in this space, the way they operate in this network environment can be seen as objects in and of themselves, as evidence, as we want to use them as proxies for other things, as not text, because GIFs, I have a student at the School of Computing and Information doing their dissertation research on emojis. Emojis are an excellent example of text, not text, and character sets all worked in together. And they are, in fact, numbers in the machine, or at least symbols.
Allison, do you have time for one more question?
Probably two.
All right. Two? Okay, great. Excellent. When you call computers, quote, processors as symbols, end quote, I was unclear as to whether this is essentially a restatement of the role of semiotics in art historical inquiry, albeit with a computer, or something different than that. Could you please elaborate?
Sure. Thank you for that question. It's a simple question of clarification. I think. I apologize for not being clear. I literally mean the workings of the computer. I wasn't making a semiotic point. Symbols, the digital contemporary computer is a philosophy machine. It works on truth tables. It manipulates electricity as what is known as ones and zeros. It isn't actually ones and zeros. It's voltage and not voltage. And then along that line, everything has to be represented symbolically. They manipulate symbols of the world that we offer them. They are symbol processors. Just the computer. That's all I meant. I didn't mean it in an art historical semiotic sense.
Okay, I'm going to wrap two questions together for you, Allison. The first one is, can you recommend one of your publications that addresses these later ideas regarding digital visualization? They'd love to read more that you've done. And the second is, they would hope that you would tell us more about your project with Chris Nygren.
All right. Yeah, I saw these. Being able to think a little bit in advance about your questions is a fantastic innovation. So I can answer that relatively. Good news and bad news about my collaboration with Chris. The good news is that we've had our first big, long 10,000 word article accepted to Digital Humanities Quarterly, and it'll be coming out in the spring. So if you want to see the start of our engagement with computer vision and Paul, you can look to spring. It takes as its springboard Morelli, Giovanni Morelli. So that will be that might be of interest. But it doesn't move to the actual neural network stuff that we did with Paul, so that's the bad news. So a lot of the stuff that's in the DHQ paper coming out is about the old-fashioned, the 20-year-old computer vision techniques. But we think it through from an art historical point of view. Those visualizations of the pooling layers of the convolutional neural networks were produced about a year and a little bit ago, and they're real cutting edge things. It's been very difficult for the computer scientists to figure out how to visualize what these algorithms are doing because they are inherently black boxed in their own way. And so I'm looking forward to working on that soon. That's a little bit of a cheat, but it's true.
Great. The next question is for Park. If the first purposeful act of Rick's collaborations is to pick a problem with a known solution, what happens if engineers and art historians disagree on what constitutes a known solution?
Well, that's where the knowledge comes. I mean, that's the interesting part. That's the goal. That's what you're trying to, if that could be sorted out, that would be fantastic. That's what you're building toward. And so in order to get there, the assertion is that, that it was a fruitful step to start somewhere where there's a known solution and then work forward. Now, if the question is like, there are some realms where nothing is known at all, there's nowhere at all to start. That would be tough business, but I think that you can work your way back and find somewhere to start, and that the assertion is that's precisely how you can then get to and answer the unknowns. That's where knowledge is generated. So I hope someplace you could dial it back to. And find some common ground. Maybe Rick wants to say something.
Yeah, finally. So I guess I'd point out that almost every collaboration started with art historians or the conservators posing a question they did not know the answer to. And so in other words, they'd say, we have this paper and we can't identify it. And it took months, sometimes more than a year, to convince them that we had to start to build a computational solution. We had to start with something that had known answers. So my response would be, if I were first initiating the first contact with somebody that I wanted to collaborate with, is that I would basically not look at that question as the first question, and Park alluded to that. So, and and I think it has to be a question about which there can't be controversy. It's something that you count, that you measure, that you weigh, that you observe, so that there is a fact. It's something that you're seeking to count, for instance. It's not unknown in the sense that you already know what you want to do. And that was another feature of every problem I looked at. It had to be something, if I'm starting a new collaboration, I can't come in and say, hey, why don't you spend time working at this thing, because I think I've got an answer to it. What has to happen is I have to spend time on the other side, so to speak, and understand what questions they really want answered. So in fact, my very first collaboration was with the Van Gogh Museum. I spent 1.5 years before we found the thread counting problem. And I would visit every couple of months and went around with the head conservator, Ella Hendricks, and I would say, just show me everything you do that you think the computer could help with. And it took us 1.5 years to find something that fit this. I had about 6 rules that the problem needed to satisfy, and Park mentioned some of them. But I would say that that's not a good place to start. You don't start, for instance, trying to decide if this is a fake or not a fake. That's a very sexy topic. Everybody will be interested. You'll fill the auditorium. You'll have people that on both sides that want to engage, but it won't get you anywhere, okay? Because whatever techniques you're using, if they're unfamiliar to the people that are really going to make the choice on the art history side, Park pointed out, they're easily dismissed. So I was always looking for something, as you know, when working with a Frick, we're actually labeling. We're trying to do automatic labeling. But you have to already know what labels you want to use, and they have to be obvious in the image that you're looking at. So it can't be that you just turn the computer loose and let it label things for you, because it's going to come up with a list that you can't use. It's going to tell you, well, I just found an object, all the odd 40 coefficients are greater than 2. I mean, the cross context really has to be there, and that takes time to develop. And that's something that neither side has a lot of. So there has to be a lot of desire to get started. But sorry, that's a rambling answer. But
very helpful. So I think we're done with all the questions.
Can I just interject with an answer that somebody gave, which I think is nice, and it's something that we're going to be covering in our series a little bit too, is about equity and access. But somebody had said, if you have a slide collection and you don't know what to do with it, you should give it to a third world country. This person had given their slides to Samoa, who had started an art history course, and they didn't have access to the digital material that we all have access to. So that's just one thing I wanted to slide in there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you on November 12th. The next 3 parts of the symposium will start at 11 a.m. as you see on your screen. So it will be 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. instead of 1 to 3. Thank you very much.